Good evening. My name is Cynthia Kress, and I welcome you to the February meeting of the Transportation Advisory Board. I'm currently serving as the chair, and we will, before I open the meeting and get to the first item, minutes, I just want to recognize that we do have a quorum. We have 6 regular members, and then we have a couple, at least one excuse absence that I know of, and then that would make Jerry, who's currently technically an alternate, bumped up to regular member for the purpose of this evening. So just wanted to recognize that. And with that, I will, I always like to write down exactly. I'm seeking approval of the minutes by unanimous consent as presented. I did read them and seeking approval. I'm not seeing any objection. I'm seeing some nods. So I'll consider the minutes approved. Thank you. That's pretty simple. Looks like we've got some public comment. So I will turn it over to our host. It's like John has a variety of duties this evening, both technical and substantive in nature. Are you able to, you're hosting, so you're able to promote the public comment members? I know people
Yes.
often like to be seen come up on video, so if that's possible, that would be great.
Okay. I will
If
start
it's
off by
preferred.
promoting David Kapler, who's the first one in there, and then move on to Ann Fletcher.
Thank you. I'm just actually an observer tonight, but there's a lady in this other room who's going to be speaking, and I've read her material, and I agree with what she has to say. Thank you.
Thank you for coming, David.
Okay.
Mr. Kapler. And John, you said we have another, Ms. Fletcher.
And I have promoted Ann. Ann, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you. I think David Kapler's still up for video. Can you hear me?
Yep. Yeah.
Okay, great.
We can hear you, but we can't see you. Would you prefer to be on video?
Sure, that'd be fine.
It's up to you, but I don't know if John can make that happen.
Okay.
If you don't mind holding on 1 second. John, is that possible?
To get the video on. Let's...
Great. Thank you.
I don't see my name up there. It might be under Issaquah, or it might be under Ann Fletcher.
We're seeing it, Ann Fletcher, we're seeing that, but you flashed on video briefly and then you went away, but the entire time I've seen your name in one of the squares, and now I see your video.
Okay.
Thank
It's
you.
just as well, I can't see myself. Oh, there it is. Okay, great. Thank you so much for taking the technical time to let me be here as much as I can be. My name is Ann Fletcher, and I am a resident of Issaquah, and with the group People for Climate Action and the Issaquah chapter. I'm really happy to be here tonight. Thank you for having the chance for public comment. I'd like to comment on the second item on the agenda tonight, the transportation improvement projects. I've been looking for connections between the Climate Action Plan, which was approved after the Mobility Master Plan, and have found in climate was mentioned in Goal 2 of the Master Mobility Plan, and I found some really great connections there. So I was really pleased to see that. And I was looking for some connections in the criteria that the Transportation Advisory Board will use to recommend the competing transportation improvement projects, which I believe you're going to be talking some about tonight. And I was looking at the criteria categories from the guiding principles, and I noticed that one of the guiding principles is not a criteria, and that's called anticipate transformation, developing a transportation system that enables new technologies, emerging transportation options, and economic trends. I wasn't sure why this one, it seems like maybe that's a difficult one to have as a category in the criteria. However, it does seem important for something as future oriented as climate. So I just had wondered about that and thought it might be something to consider. Then the other thing is that I was looking at the criteria themselves. I found just to find evidence for climate and environmental kinds of criteria. And I did see that in the protect environment, there are quite a number of things that would relate to climate. It does not mention consideration of tree canopy or carbon sequestration as a consideration in the projects, but it does mention some other things. Also, the promotion of non-auto and drive alone mode parts also relate to climate, and the regional connections with transit, bus transit. I think the light rail is too far away for us to reach some of our goals in the next 2 decades. But in any case, as I was looking at it, it seemed like at best climate and the environment would count for maybe about 30 points out of the 78 total. And so my question or my concern was that the point system using these criteria could result in funding more projects that would certainly have many desirable aspects. They're all important things, but do not necessarily or sufficiently contribute to the environment or climate. The goals in the Mobility Master Plan itself do relate very well to climate and the environment. A lot of them do. It's the criteria themselves where the actual funding happens, and that seems to be weighted more to the other important concerns and not provide enough consideration of the environment and climate. I think this could be improved by perhaps looking at that numerical weighting again, adding more direct references to climate goals that are in the climate action plan that was approved by the city, and including possibly an anticipate transformation category. I think this would help Issaquah spend a finite amount of funds that we have wisely during these swiftly changing times. Thank you very much for this opportunity to comment.
Thank you very much. Thanks for your interest and thanks for being here. John, do we have any other comments?
No one else is in the attendee list. We did receive a few emails, including one from Ms. Fletcher, which
Okay.
I don't know if we summarized those or sent. I guess you guys have all seen them, what we do for the official record, or if we include them in the minutes, but I did want to bring that up, that we did receive a couple emails.
Yeah, let's move along and then maybe make a note to discuss that maybe in the next time we meet in preparation for this meeting, and maybe take a quick check-in with the clerk, because I do think it's challenging to receive additional substantive material in that format on the same day of the meeting. And I just want to maybe take that offline and just kind of think about how we want to approach those, because they're a little bit problematic, I think, to ask volunteers who have day jobs to consume additional information. And I think the best forum is to come to the meeting, and I understand that people can't always do that. But I also think you get into trouble when you summarize people's comments. So I'd like to table that, if that's okay, John. Okay. And that brings us to item 4A on the agenda, which is the vice chair elections. And John is going to be on firing on all cylinders this evening. Take it away, John.
Thank you very much. We have 2 nominations for the vice chair position, and those are Joseph and Micah. And is there any discussion about the nominees or on the nominees?
This is Cynthia again. Hey, I just realized, and I don't know if this is appropriate, but I believe that when we did chair and vice chair nominations in the past, we invited the nominees to say, 30 seconds on why they were interested in this. And now I'm putting them both on the spot. They both obviously submitted materials, so they gave that some thought. But perhaps that was a miss, and that's something we should have submitted in advance. But maybe just, I think it should be either both or neither, but Micah and Joseph, did you want to just say a couple sentences about why this is interesting to you? It's not entirely fair to ask you this on the spot. Oh, Tom has something to say. Let's hear what Tom has to say. Tom, you're on mute. Tom, you're on mute. I really want to know what those hand waves are, but did anyone else hear Tom?
No.
No, I'm very curious. The funny thing is I was saying, Tom, you're on mute while I was on mute. So, Tom, I don't think anybody heard you, but we're very curious. Still not hearing you. I'm seeing your lips move.
How about now?
Now, yes.
Okay, I have like 5 microphone choices. I'm like, where did all these come from? So I was trying to find the hands up thing down below, so I just raised my hand because I couldn't find it. I saw like a little write-up, and maybe it was in the agenda notes for today from each, but it would be good to have them just, we can reiterate that and talk a little bit what you were saying, Cynthia, about just talking a little bit about why they're looking for the position. Vice Chair.
I also think that's a great idea, but I'm feeling remiss of not getting them any notice. And so I feel a little bad about that. So it's more of a process thing. Micah and Joseph, are you guys okay with just taking a couple minutes? Maybe just nod and say, okay, great. Sorry about that. But Joseph, why don't you go ahead and start?
Yeah, of course. Actually, I wrote something that I want to say. So I'll just say that really briefly. Hi, everyone. Of course, you all know me as your youth chair member. Actually, last week I turned 18, so I'm not sure whether or not I still qualify as a youth, but I can just pretend that I'm a youth, I guess. As you all know, I'm interested in running as the vice chair of the board, and the main reason why I was hoping to do so is that I want to work with you all to use your input along with community input to help further implement and advocate for the transportation needs of our growing city. And on top of that, I want to help speak up for voices that are often overlooked in city planning, and help to implement everyone's feedback so that we can help make transportation infrastructure equitable and comprehensive. Of course, if you do not choose to vote for me as your vice chair, I would still love to definitely work alongside all of you as your young adult member. And I've had a really great time learning while serving on this board. And I'm sure that Micah would do a great job as a vice chair. Thank you.
Thanks so much. And thanks for your efforts and your interest. Micah, go ahead.
I guess just talk a little bit briefly about first why I joined this board. I've always been interested in serving my community. When I was actually around Joseph's age, I was on the Redmond Youth Partnership Advisory Committee. And that was what we had available. I've always sort of thought that I have a obligation and an interest in doing what I can. And part of that is including my voice, but part of that is also trying to represent other people and add to that conversation. And so that kind of leads to what I think of as the vice chair role, because I was thinking about this when I was nominated. What exactly is the vice chair? And I wrote up a little thing about it. And to me, the vice chair, of course, is to support Cynthia as the chair in whatever duty that entails. But also the vice chair, as we all have this role. We're an advisory board. We're here to bring our own opinions and to represent others, represent parts of our community, and to also be thoughtful about the parts of our community that are not represented. And so to me, that vice chair role is just to aid in that conversation, to try and bring in pieces and points of view that may otherwise not be included. And so I'd be happy to and interested, of course, in serving on the board in that role. And I would also continue to be happy to serve as just a regular board member as well. So thank you.
Thank you, guys. John, do you know what to do next?
Yes. And I guess we'll continue. Is there any discussion on the nominees?
I have a question. This is Janie. Joseph, are you going to college and are you going to still be able to be with us?
Yeah, so I'm going to college in the fall this year. If I'm correct, I should still be able to attend meetings, but I'm not 100% sure.
You're going to which college?
Oh yeah, Washington University in St. Louis.
Oh, congrats. It's very exciting.
Thank you.
I'm not hearing any other discussion. Was I supposed to say something, John?
No, you are absolutely right. And the script says, if there is no further description or discussion, we will now vote on the nominees in the order they were nominated.
Could I just bring up something? So now that you have a quorum, your full members are here, then I should not, this is Jerry, I should not be voting, correct?
Sherry, now that, yeah, I didn't notice. I know that we do have a quorum. A couple people popped in late. I don't actually know how that works.
But it's fine. I'm not really a real member of the board.
We consider you a real member, but I do know, I appreciate being asked. And I suspect that somewhere, somebody like the clerk could have a clear, objective answer to this. If the meeting starts and the regular member is not there, but then jumps on, there's probably a right answer. I don't know what that answer is. And that's a great.
I will abstain from voting because of that.
Very generous of
My
you, and
thought
I'll
is-
make a note to check out that. Thank you, because
That's
it's
a
the
good
ultimate
question.
thing is, it's a lot to ask people to come and put all this in and then not really understand their status. So I'll make a commitment to get a little better educated on that. So thank you for saying that.
Okay. And the way this works is we vote on the first nominee and then we vote on the second nominee, and it's going to be a roll call vote. So I'm going to say your name and you will vote aye for yes or no. And it also says, as a reminder, if you wish to vote for a later nominee, you will need to vote no for all other nominees. So if you want to vote for the second nominee, say no the first time and vice versa. You can't have two yeses. And then the way it works is the first nominee receiving a majority vote is elected to the position. And we'll repeat until that happens. David. Who's nominated first?
I believe it was Joseph. I think he
Okay.
self-nominated.
The first vote is on whether to elect Joseph as vice chair through April 30th, I think. I'll double check.
Point of order, John. Point of order, John. I didn't hear that date.
Oh, I'm double checking it. I know it's in April. The memo. Yes, the term will end on April 30th. 2022. And we're going to do a roll call vote on whether to, on Joseph's nomination. And David, you'll be the first to vote.
I vote yes.
Erica,
Aye.
Cynthia,
Nay.
Joseph,
Wait, did you say my name?
yes.
Oh, I guess I.
Julian,
Aye.
Micah,
Nay.
Tom, couldn't hear you. I'm going to click on mute, see if that works, Tom.
Sorry, I was on mute. Was that through this year or next year?
It's through April 30th, 2022. So
Two.
basically 2 months from now.
Say yay.
And Jamie,
Aye.
add it up. And that is 6 yeses and 2 nos, which according to the instructions would make Joseph the vice chair. Congratulations, Joseph.
Congratulations.
you.
That's awesome. Well, we get to do that all over again do we do that in April or do we do that in May? We must do that in April to prepare for May.
I would think May, because wouldn't the new terms begin in May?
Well, I was just thinking that then you would be without in between the April and the May meeting.
Oh, another good question for the clerk's office.
If it ends in April, I would think we would do it in April again for starting with the May meeting.
Right, so there'd be a 2-week lame duck chair and vice chair. Okay, well, very well. Well, good job, team. I'm excited that there was a contested process. That's great. It's I think a sign of a healthy board, and I think it's really great. There's so many, you guys are so engaged, or we're all so engaged. With that, I think we will move along to item 4B. John, you ready to start on that?
Yeah.
I do notice that we have we do have one of the members of the public is still promoted to a participant, which isn't particularly, okay.
Actually, it was a good thing. I've been trying to figure that out because in order to make her video cam on, I made her a presenter, but it wasn't until I made myself the presenter just now that the option to put back as an attendee.
Not allowed to kick off your presenter, I guess. Okay. I'll turn it over to you to talk about the Neighborhood Safety Improvements Program.
Thank you very much, Cynthia. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and go through the presentation for the Neighborhood Safety Program. Is it showing the screen or the note screen?
It's showing the screen, the presentation, what we're supposed to see.
Yep, thank you very much. Tonight I'm here to talk about the Neighborhood Safety Improvement Program that the city of Issaquah has been working on implementing. Tonight, I'll talk about an overview for the Mobility Master Plan implementation. When the Mobility Master Plan was drafted and adopted, it had a number of items to implement, including the Neighborhood Safety Program, and talk about a little bit about what that program is and to get some feedback from the board. The feedback or direction that we need are 3 items. One, is the proposed process adequate to start the program? Other criteria for project evaluation, and any changes to the program timeline. This slide shows visually the different items that are in the Mobility Master Plan implementation. The transit system discussion is something that the city is going to be starting very soon with the work to do a transit study. We talked to the TAB recently about pedestrian crossing guidelines, complete streets, traffic calming, and the engineering staff have been updating the street standards as parts of doing policy and standards updates to align with the Mobility Master Plan. Another item is the reviewing of projects, which we did a lot last summer / early fall. We're going to talk about later on tonight. In the transit study, looking at funding and things like that. But another one of them is the neighborhood safety program. And that is what I'm here to talk to you about tonight for this item. The purpose of the neighborhood safety program is to re-energize or empower neighborhoods to work in collaboration with the city to try and make small improvements, especially prioritizing safety for pedestrians and bicyclists. The neighborhood safety program is proposing to have 5 community volunteers or coordinators from different geographic zones, so that way we could have a representation of the whole city, and to work with that group in the community to identify and prioritize neighborhood safety improvement programs or projects to implement. Project ideas would come from suggestions from the community coordinators who would be plugged into the program. It also would come from residents throughout the city using our C-Click Fix system. I don't know if any of you have tried using that system, but the C-Click Fix is a website that the city of Issaquah uses for a variety of things. It could be you have a neighborhood traffic concern and you want the city to evaluate whether your street qualifies for traffic calming, or maybe there should be a no parking sign. It also goes beyond transportation and could be used for maybe litter in a park or all kinds of different things. And so that's another intake system for the neighborhood safety program. And the community coordinators would prioritize community zone projects, and with the intent of not doing all the projects in one neighborhood. We would want to try and spread throughout the city. The proposed categories for evaluation when considering ranking the neighborhood safety projects once they have been submitted would be safety, users, community support, equity, connectivity, and sustainability. The proposed timeline for the neighborhood safety program is to develop the program this spring, which that's what we're here tonight, and as well as next month at the TAB meeting. Put together the draft of how it would work, form the 5-person committee, and then in the summer / fall, put together the project list. So once kind of in between those steps would be to get the projects submitted, whether it's from the evaluation committee or the C-Click Fix or staff recommendations, and vet those projects, score them, prioritize the funding of them, and then work with the city council in the budgeting process to get the projects budgeted for construction in 2023. Also, while they're under construction, as part of this program, develop some performance metrics to evaluate the program, and then in 2024, restart the program and make any updates based on experience of what worked well and what needs to be improved. As I mentioned, the direction needed tonight is the proposed process adequate to start a program, other criteria to consider for evaluation, and any changes to the timeline. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. So we can have a discussion.
So before you go, Julian, I do want to just encourage you to use the chat. It's a little easier to track when there's multiple people. It's fine when there's one person, but it's not very scalable. So Julian, go ahead.
Yeah, just preliminary comments. I really appreciate this kind of participatory sort of budget in terms of neighborhood safety program that the staff is implementing. I think participatory budgeting is pretty useful. And just a question, what kind of projects would be under this project's purview? Just in basic traffic calming stuff?
So here's what I envision, and I think it's up for discussion. And I'll base it on the experience with what we get through our C-Click Fix system, because a lot of that I think would really qualify for this kind of program, where it could be a neighborhood has a busy crosswalk next to a park and it's unmarked. There's no other improvements at it, and they would want to nominate it for consideration to be improved in some way. And I think there would be a vetting process, but a crossing, or it could be maybe there's a street where there's 50 feet of sidewalk missing, where that could be improved. Or maybe it is a street where we've identified there is a speeding problem and it is time to move it past the education component of traffic calming to actually install a physical device. But the whole point would be focused on pedestrian and bicycle safety within a neighborhood setting. So maybe not, I wouldn't anticipate a project on Front Street or East Lake Sammamish Parkway, but something that would really be more in a neighborhood setting.
Micah has a question. Go ahead.
So after a project is submitted through C-Click Fix, what's the process? Does that person get contacted? Because, you know, they may just type it in and that description is not, you know, really the detail that's needed. Is there, they going to be contacted, or did this group's idea they would just run with that initial comment?
Yeah, great question. And a couple of things. Once something is submitted into or in the C-Click Fix system, what we're proposing is we'd actually have a category, and we can work with the communication staff to advertise this through the social media avenues, and someone could also see it. But another thing that could, so let's go through that scenario, and then I'll go through another scenario. And so if you were to put in a C-Click Fix and request an improvement somewhere within the city of Issaquah, that there's a team of us that actually meets every month or every week on Monday morning, and you get a response, which would kind of, it'd probably be a canned response, which would outline the process and the timeline so you'd know what to expect. And then there would be periodic updates to let the resident know where it was at. And so we can communicate that way. It also allows the resident to also, or other residents to add to it and additional comments. Another way where a C-click fix could be used for it is a lot of times we get a neighborhood traffic concern and it may or may not qualify for it may not be big enough for the neighborhood safety improvement program. Maybe all it is putting a new street sign somewhere. And that we wouldn't actually run through the neighborhood safety program. We would just put in the work order and get the street sign installed. Where I think this could be beneficial from a staff point of view is a lot of time we'll get things in C-click fix that are bigger than just putting up a street sign. And let's say there's a dozen requests and they're all warranted being done, but then how to prioritize and evaluate, because maybe we only have the capacity to get 6 done now and the rest will have to wait a little bit. And I think that's another way where the neighborhood safety program could really help, because as the staff, one of the things I'm worried about is inequitable distribution of how we respond to these kind of things. And I think having the 5-person committee would really help on items that are bigger than just putting in a street sign, where there'd actually be worth hiring a contractor to do a little bit of work, but not such a big fix that it required its own standalone project.
That answer your question? Okay. I was next, but I'm gonna skip is it a follow-up, Micah? Okay, different one. Okay. I'm gonna bump myself down because I want to hear what other people have to say. So Erica, go ahead, and then we'll have Jeannie go after that.
How do you anticipate this fitting in with the idea of, I might be conflating my plans and terms and things, it's a really long day, but I think with complete streets, or with the fact that, there's how many miles of spots in Issaquah that don't have like paved sidewalks. So I guess how does something like a neighborhood program fit into completing those gaps?
I think it can help, although when I looked at and I'll say the tier 1 and tier 2 sidewalk gaps, I think it can help a little bit with those, but a lot of times for the tier 1 and tier 2 sidewalk gaps, there's a reason why we already don't have sidewalk there, and it's a difficult one. So I think this can help sometimes with those situations. And I even can think of an example that I have seen in one spot in Issaquah that actually technically is in a tier 1 or tier 2 sidewalk gap, where it's a short stretch where maybe this project could actually help connect it. But I think this would be, I don't think this would make a big dent on this. I think it could improve other areas of the community, but a lot of those tier 1 and tier 2 sidewalk gaps, I think, are going to take a bigger effort, just because it could be that the street has a steep slope or a wetland or other factors that make it why we don't already have sidewalk there. And this is a generalization of what I've observed. Did that answer your question?
Oh, yeah, that was my question. Okay, great. Thanks. Let's go ahead and go to Jeannie.
Yeah. So I'm sorry if I missed it, but I'm wondering is there a way that projects will be addressed if someone doesn't submit them to C-click fix, but it's an issue in the city that would qualify for this program? Because I'm thinking there might be parts of the city that would really benefit from this, but people might not know about it or have the education, like where do I go to submit the project? So
Oh, that's a great one. And just thinking of how best to do that. So two thoughts are the 5 coordinators can help do that and nominate projects. And I think it also would be okay for staff to nominate projects. And I say that not wanting to control the process, but
mhm.
be able to maybe bring in some insight of, hey, this is something we've seen. It might be a good candidate. And then let the process of how they would get evaluated take over.
Yeah, I think it would be good to not solely rely on um, the community to recommend projects.
Thanks, Jeannie. So I bumped out of line and I'm going to jump back into the line here and go next. This is Cynthia, and I have a couple of quick comments, and one of them actually segues nicely into what Jeannie just said, and that's that I do think we need to figure out how to make sure that, and I saw there were 5 different neighborhoods, and I don't know how those neighborhoods shake out in terms of where our most vulnerable populations are, our lower income populations are within those 5. I don't know if they're equally distributed, but I want to make sure that we think hard about that. And I'm all for this kind of program. And like Julian said at the beginning, the idea of getting people more engaged in taking ownership. And I think that's a really powerful notion. But I also know that typically lower income people don't have the time to participate in city government. And so, perhaps there's somebody paid to do that if they can't. And that's what equity is. It doesn't mean everyone has identical treatment. It means that if a community is further behind, then they might need some shoring up, and maybe somebody can't do this as a volunteer because that's just not an option. So I don't know exactly. I'm not trying to prescribe an exact solution, but I want to be really careful that we don't inadvertently turn this back into traditional city government with the loudest voices, the oldest, whitest people get what they want. So that was my first comment. My second comment is, this is a little bit nitpicky, and but I just noticed it in the discussion about the program objectives. I think we just need to add the term safety in there, because the objective isn't just to engage people. I mean, you could throw a carnival in the neighborhood just to engage people. We want to engage people on safety. And so I just think that we should make sure that's part of the opening remarks. So I'm being a little bit quibbling over words and semantics there, but I just don't want to forget that as we're describing this program, that safety is the primary goal, and it's getting the community involved in safety. I have 2 other quick comments, and one is it's really more of a question. In going through this, the MMP, and I love the fact that we're doing a good job linking today's topics with the MMP, so it's not just a document that sits on a shelf and collects dust, but I wasn't sure how it went from safety to bike ped safety. There's even a thing in the MMP that describes, the vehicular the accidents in, our transportation system are like, most obviously. I'm all for bike ped and vulnerable users to be the priority, but I thought there was a leap, and I wasn't sure if that was intentional. Did we have a specific time when we narrowed it to bike ped? Because the MMP, if I read it correctly, didn't narrow the neighborhood program to bike and ped. There could be intersections that are unsafe even for vehicles. So I guess that's a question, John. And if you don't have the answer, I understand. But I guess my question to you would be, did we somewhere along the line intentionally narrow this to bike ped? Or do you think that could have just been like an oversight or an assumption?
I don't know the answer. I can take a guess. And my guess is more of an oversight. And when we come back, we can talk about that. I do personally see a benefit to having it not only exclusive to bike and ped, but also include the automobile. Because when we evaluate the projects, I think a project that has a high benefit to vulnerable users, whether it's pedestrians or bicyclists, would score better than a project that maybe is preventing property damage, only accidents with cars, but still could see a benefit to it. And especially since we're going to be going through a process of evaluating it, that rather than eliminating one mode from the program, we can include it. And then as we work through the scoring criteria and the evaluation, then I think the projects will settle themselves out. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And so I'm making a comment, and this is where I want to pause for a moment and say, I can't speak for the rest of the board. So I would propose that we just take a moment and see if people are agreeing. I would propose that vulnerable users, bikes, peds, and anyone else that we consider a vulnerable user scores higher and is a higher priority. But I would not be supportive of it being ineligible if it were not that. But I don't want to speak for the whole board, because if we're going to be giving direction to staff, we should be doing it as a board and not as individuals. Certainly questions and clarifications, one-off, one-on-one is fine, but I don't want to make assumptions that others are agreeing with me. So I don't think we need any formal action, but maybe just some nods, or if anybody wants to, if anybody disagrees, but let's first maybe nod or thumbs up if you generally agree with that as giving that direction to staff. Okay.
I also agree.
Yeah, okay,
Sorry.
Julian's on the fence. So, David, did you have I can't read that, you're in agreement, okay. So we can revisit it and now what I'm interpreting is that most people seem generally in agreement. Julian's kind of on the fence. I didn't see anyone else that disagreed. Certainly not making any decisions right now, but we can have another discussion about it. Julian, you can, try to pitch your fellow committee members to move the needle one way or another. And then I don't know if we ultimately take action or not, but this is sort of an informal way to make sure that, I just want to make sure I wasn't speaking for the board as a whole. Those were my comments, and I know I had one more, but I think that's plenty for now. Let's see, so that's mine, and now I have to go back to look at the chat. I do believe Micah was next with a question, and then David, Janie noticed that you had a question, so I'll have you go after Micah. Go ahead, Micah.
Yeah, so my question was actually right in line with the comment you had made. It was sort of looking at it from the financial perspective of that, whether there's some function of allocating funding so that you have a limitation built in where you don't just have the squeaky wheel getting all the funding.
Yes, and I think as we draft the program, that's something to consider. So tonight we're talking about it and really focusing on the feedback we need. But I think as we dive into the details, and we'll come back to the tab, start to talk about some of those details. And part of the funding will be ultimately decided by council. And I can't remember what Kirkland has, but I think it does make sense to maybe put a cap on or I guess maybe it makes sense to consider putting a cap on the cost of a project, because if it exceeds a certain amount of money, that to me seems like no longer a neighborhood safety improvement. That seems like its own project that should be separately funded, is my opinion, but I do want to get feedback from the board on that.
So I guess I meant more, instead of capping funding by project, by so there are these 5 areas, 5 neighborhoods, that or some other sort of geographic based funding, because I think, sorry, go ahead.
You actually triggered a thought in my mind. I recently participated as an evaluator for the Transportation Alternatives Program that the Puget Sound Regional Council, or PSRC, put on. And it kind of gave me insight to what the 5 volunteers might be going through. And so it was a really good experience. And it's the way this competition worked is staff at PSRC had actually evaluated and scored all the applications, and then had a group of people, engineers and planners who work for different cities and other jurisdictions in the region, to consider the other factors, the geographic distribution. And we had probably 4 hours of discussion over 2 meetings. And I think we spent the most amount of our time actually talking about geographic, and we're trying to be careful to call it distribution instead of equity, but basically how to make sure that the different regions, in this case, it was the 4 counties in the region, but in this case, it'd be the different neighborhoods, that how we balance out the distribution of those funds to do exactly what you said. And I think that's really where that committee probably would spend a lot of their time, is saying, okay, these are the really good projects, and how do we balance spreading them out throughout the city? At least that's one way where it could happen, depending on how the final program is designed.
Micah, did that answer your question? Okay, thank you. So let's see. David and then Julian.
John, my question is, I'm looking at the memorandum about the coordinators and how those coordinators are chosen. But what I don't see in the timeline, both in the memorandum and the slides, is where those coordinators fall in to go to work or get what they're supposed to get. And I guess the reason I'm really concerned is, as a board member and seeing some of the safety issues around the valley floor here, I really think that that coordinator's job is really, really important. And I, as just a citizen, would like to know when I can talk to that coordinator to get that information in front of the safety program. And as Micah talked about, making sure that the dollars are available to fix those situations. So I know that was kind of long-winded, but I just want to know when those coordinators go to work.
So when you say go to work, are you talking about work on the neighborhood safety program, or like their day job? I just want to make sure I understand.
No, not their day job. As a retiree, I'm tired of hearing about day jobs. My concern is, I'm seeing here that the coordinators are picked by staff, and then they fall into the NSIP projects. So when do they start getting those projects and doing what they do as coordinators to get that that in front of either the TAB or the council, or however they're going to get this highlighted? I'm looking at the timeline. I don't see them in there.
Okay, so the way I see the neighborhood, how about this? I'm going to share my vision for it, but I want to make sure I get the feedback from the board. And so what I'm saying, if you guys have a different vision, feel free to speak up. I envision getting the neighborhood, recruiting the neighborhood coordinators fairly soon. However, I see their role coming in once I think once we design the process, and we want to work with the tab to design the process and the evaluation criteria. To me, it makes sense for staff, because we have more time, because these are volunteers, to score the projects according to the evaluation criteria that's in the program. And then where the coordinators would actually get into is talking about how to select the projects for funding and other considerations and making sure that there's an equal geographic distribution. That's how I see it. And it's large part based on my experience volunteering on the Transportation Alternatives Program Committee. And that is one of the things, since you guys are actually volunteers on a board, that I would like the feedback for. Like, do you think the volunteers would want to be more involved, or is that the right amount of involvement? I don't think we could have them less involved and be truly effective, but I guess I'm kind of answering your question with the question of wanting to and know the time commitment that we would be getting from these volunteers and thinking of yourselves. Not that you would be on this, you're already very time committed to serving the city, but I do think it is a big ask of people and wanting to best utilize their time where they feel like they're contributing, but not so overwhelmed with the time commitment that they regret volunteering for it.
And can I throw in just one idea? So I'm looking at the schedule on the slides and I see the project conference early February of 2022. Of course, here we are in late February. So I see those coordinators really being chosen or selected and involved probably right away, which is now through the April timeframe, but yet I don't see that on the slide. So my question was really, where do they get involved? When do they become involved?
The schedule showing the soliciting the committee in March. So I would say probably get involved around April.
So I look at the schedule where they do get involved in March. It looks like the next thing they would do is solicit committee and then program draft is in April. And they start looking at the projects in May and June. July and August is the part. So that's basically the schedule that they're looking at. So by the time the budget processing started in September, October, November, they'd be done selecting the projects by the end of the year.
Guys, I
Okay,
see
sorry.
I'm sorry, but I see the projects announced in mid-April. So if they're going to be involved, the coordinators really need to be involved in this, probably March latest. And the way the wording was in the memorandum, it looks like staff selects those coordinators. And so I guess I got my answer. It looks like they're going to have to be on board pretty soon.
I see that Julian has a question. I'm wondering if you're looking at the Kirkland page, because the one that's an Excel spreadsheet that just has some colored bars and is very simple is what Tom was referring to. But the one that says 2022 Neighborhood Safety Program Schedule with a big map of Kirkland has dates that are closer to what you're describing. Is that possible?
It's Cynthia, and I was looking at that because there weren't really any dates up in the memorandum.
Okay, there's a separate single sheet that says timeline, and it's right above the presentation on our
Yeah. So I'm
agenda.
not sure if you want to just share that.
Yeah,
There you go.
I got it now. Thank you.
of course.
But still, my question is still there. It looks to me, because I'm seeing that we review up through April, but if those projects are going to be presented soon after that, the coordinators definitely have to be on board. And so anyway, I still have the question.
I would say they'd need to be on board by May. that there's a lot of preliminary work that can be done in April. And this can float a little bit. The big driving concern, or the driving force in this, is to actually get the list of projects and the budgets finalized in time to incorporate into the budgeting process. And that is what we really need to hit. The rest of the details, we can kind of sort through. The biggest one is right here, September, October, and November. And actually, a lot of times we start our budget entry even a little sooner. So we're going to have to make some approximations, but to actually have the finalized list ready to go in time for when the budget gets presented in the fall, that is what we really need to get done. And it is a little bit squished on time for the first year.
I think that we opened up some new issues, but I'm going to go ahead and keep the discussion going. So David, did you get your question at least addressed? Can I go ahead and move on?
Yes, I did. Just one quick comment. They're going to have to hit the road running
Yeah.
with those projects.
I think there's an issue here, but I do want to, there's starting to be people wanting to speak in the chat. So yeah, I think you've identified an important issue and I'd love to come back to it. But in the meantime, let's go to Julian, who's been waiting patiently, and then Tom.
So I was doing some research last year about the participatory budget process, and in Love, which is a city which is about the size of Issaquah, near my grandparents' house in the Czech Republic. They do this process every year. They've been doing it for a while, and the budget they have is pretty significant for that. And I feel like the time commitment for the volunteers who are going to join the board is only going to be as high as how meaningful the city thinks these projects are. This program is going to be. So yeah, I think it would be useful to, in terms of the car safety projects, I think it would be very useful to, not detract as many resources away, assuming that this program is going to be limited, at least in scope for now. And another big important thing I think is the recruitment process, making sure that we get people who aren't as traditionally involved in city processes, because then we'll see the same people running the show. And let's see, what else do I want to say? And the coordinators, they should be refreshed every year, of course. And yes, I think it's a little bit squeezed this year, based on the Less schedule. They spread out way more advertisement throughout the whole summer of the projects, and public hearings and things like that. It's way more spread out. But I know this is just the first year, so hopefully next year it'll be much more spread out. So
Thanks, Julian. Tom, I know you put that in there quite a while ago, but we have had a good discussion. So go ahead, Tom.
It was answered, and it's more focused, I think, some of the comments that was had as far as the weighing the equity versus the needs, overall the transportation needs. So I'm good. My question that I had earlier was answered.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to read, or Erica, why don't you go ahead and read your note, just because these don't go into the record. So go ahead and read that. And also just make a note that Janie had to drop off at 7:02. Erica, go ahead and read your comments.
Yeah, sorry, I try to strike a balance between, like, I want my questions answered, but I also know that we're kind of over time for this particular topic. But and it's okay if we can't answer this question because it's all really hypothetical still. But I believe the equity board for the town has like a pilot program right now where, like, I think those board members might have been offered a possible stipend, and it's voluntary to choose, like, take it or leave it, right? You don't have to take it if you're on the board. And I believe council was floating that idea of maybe expanding it to all boards, all the volunteer boards. And so for me, that plays into this question of how many hours do we, like, kind of demand from these volunteers, like whether or not they have access to that. And again, it's voluntary to take it or not, but that weighs in heavily for me.
Thank you, Erica. I'm going to just make a comment real quick and say that I had two things to say. One is I support that. I wasn't aware that council was doing that because I don't track things that closely, but we can make that recommendation that we include this because we keep talking about equity, and we all know that some people can't afford to come to these. So I would be supportive. But I also just wanted to say that I'm really thinking about what David said, and I am just going to float this idea that I think one of your questions was, is the timing, should we proceed? And I think that on the one hand, it's great to just, build the plane while you're flying it and just do something and learn from that and move ahead. But I also think when you involve community members and in their first experience, they aren't really participating in the organic development of the projects, it's kind of discouraging. And I'm wondering if we should have a staff-driven dry run with as much outreach as is feasible, but that we don't actually have the coordinator component of the program because I just don't think it's baked enough, and I don't think we're ready. And I think it's going to be a bit of a frustrating experience for those people who do jump on. And I'd rather take our time and have people get to feel like they have more ownership of it. They have more time to talk to their community. You have more time to, yeah. So I don't, is that an option, John?
Well, I would say in your role as the Transportation Advisory Board, anything you guys want to give for advice is an option, and especially because you're looking at it from the point of view of people who volunteer for the city and what you get the most out of volunteering. And at least for you, I'm hearing the compressed schedule and involvement would be discouraging. And so that's something to consider as we draft it. And I'm curious about what other people think about that too.
Yeah, again, I don't want
very
to,
interesting perspective.
yeah, I can't speak for everyone. I'm suggesting that I think that maybe we should pause a moment. I know we're well over time and there's still a couple other people. Joseph had a question and a comment and Jerry did, but I'm just going to go ahead and pause here for a moment and say, am I the only one that thinks maybe this compressed schedule is maybe suboptimal?
I agree with you, Cynthia. So
Okay, thank you. I don't have to be, I don't have to, it doesn't have to be my way. I know the whole point is for us to act as a board. Is there somebody who wants to make a pitch that we go ahead and proceed and run fast and figure it out as we go? Is somebody else thinking that that would be preferable?
couldn't you extend it over 2 years? I mean, we could start it.
Well, there's the budget process, I think is what he's saying. So you would miss
The
out on,
construction's next year, but we need to get it into the budget.
that's
for
what's
this
driving
year.
this.
So what happens if we just delay it a year? So we miss one budget cycle? Is that really a problem? So
I wouldn't be supportive of delaying the opportunity to do small projects in neighborhoods. I trust the staff, personally, this is just my vote. I trust the staff enough to do the first go around, maybe in a model that just doesn't have that. I don't know if it would even work. Maybe it's not even the same concept. I don't know. Sorry, I'm now we're all out of order, which is what makes it really hard. Usually in person, you tip your card and all that. Let's go ahead. I'm gonna stop. You guys know how I feel. What I'm gonna do is go back to the chat so that everyone has a chance to get heard because I think I responded and interrupted Jerry. But Joseph, we kind of skipped to Joseph. Or we'll go Joseph and then Jerry. I don't know if you had a different comment, but let's go to Joseph and then give Jerry an opportunity after that and then work our way through the list. Getting control back over this discussion. Sorry. I just want everyone to have a chance to be heard. Joseph, go ahead.
Yeah, I had a really brief comment. Aside from like what I guess was proposed in terms of like outreach from the staff to the public, in terms of getting more information on, I guess, issues like in neighborhoods that need to be fixed. I think that another idea would be that I saw that currently the idea is that there's 5 coordinators, but I feel like there could it might be better to have more coordinators because when I look at the different project areas, for example, I live in West Issaquah, in like Newport, but I've only been to Montreux a handful of times and I've never really been to South Cove and Tallis. So for me, as somebody who lives in like West Issaquah, it's hard for me to advocate for those neighborhoods, in comparison to Newport. And I feel like having the presence of people who could, or more people who could advocate for their different neighborhoods and meetings would help give more diversity and ideas and a more comprehensive like list of different issues and targets that can be addressed like through the neighborhood plan.
Did you also have a question, Joseph?
Oh, no, it was answered.
Okay. Okay, Jerry, I think I interrupted you or one of us. Did you have a different comment than the one you put in the chat? That you
Well,
said about the 2 years?
well, I'm just thinking that people were talking about having Issaquah staff work on it this year. And so also I think it'd be kind of interesting to see, because we don't know ourselves what projects have already been listed. And so I don't have a feel for how many projects there really are out there. And so maybe you try to find a coordinator perhaps that has, you know, an area that I get the feeling some areas are gonna older neighborhoods are going to have a greater need than newer neighborhoods. So if you look at Montreux or anything that's been built in the past 20 years, they've been built with safety in mind. Whereas Squawk Mountain perhaps is going to have a greater need. So maybe we just need to get the coordinators involved based on what the list is right now, and perhaps, and then maybe have the staff help more and provide more guidance at this time.
Thanks, Jerry. Tom?
Quick, because I know we're trying to move on, is I think, in my experience, is once you start looking at, there might be some projects that are easy and quick to do, and some that may take a little bit of time. So rather than delaying it a year, they could take a look and see if there are projects that could get done in the cycle and be able to have a little bit more time to see what's going to take a little bit more time, investigation or design to put into the budget next year. So I think it's a very tight and compressed schedule, but I think the first things they could do is evaluate, the short term versus long term, on what can get done this year. So,
Thanks, Tom. Julian, go ahead.
Yeah, going back to your proposition, Cynthia, about making a staff-only process, I feel like we can make it more of a staff-driven process at this time, where a lot of the workload is driven by staff because it's such a rush schedule. But I think it's just crucial to have people from the community do this sort of stuff. Otherwise, it just becomes, it doesn't become participatory anymore. You have to have people from the community weighing in on these issues. So that's just my comment there. So more staff should be doing a lot more work this year, and then next year they drop off. And then I just think it's really important to preserve the schedule as it is right now and try to get these projects done by the end of the year next year.
Okay, we are definitely over time. You guys have said, I've kind of changed my mind a couple of times on this. I think you make a really good point, Julian. I think David brought up a really good issue, but I'm sort of, you're kind of convincing me. So maybe, and my vote is no, it's no stronger than anyone else's vote on these substantive matters. We're obviously not voting. I use that term loosely, but I guess the whole concept of the neighborhood is fairly important, but maybe it could be messaged where these people get involved and it's an imperfect process in the first year and you do the best you can, and you bring them along as far as you can and then commit to the second year, full year, the first real true full year of the program, they get to be involved in a much more organic or an earlier stage. Yeah. So we'll John, how do we want to wrap this up? I mean, we gave you a lot of different direction. Some of us changed our minds throughout the process. What happens next, and do you have what you need, or are we leaving you with conflicting thoughts that you feel like we shouldn't move on till it's been resolved?
Let me just look at the feedback we needed. So I guess the first thing, so we had 3 questions, which are, is the proposed process adequate to start the program? And we had a lot of discussion about that. And I think the conclusion we finally reached, and correct me if I'm wrong, is it's an imperfect start, and that we should let the volunteers know ahead of time it's imperfect. And maybe once we get through it, we can work with them to say, how can we improve this process for the next time around too? And let them be a part of that, because I think there are going to be some speed bumps along the way. And hopefully we can get their input to make it better, and we'll do the best we can for the first year. Are there other criteria that should be considered for project evaluation? Oh, and I guess going back to the first question, we also talked about automobile versus just bike ped, and the general consensus, not everyone, was include automobile, but there probably would be a higher priority for more vulnerable, but don't exclude the automobile from this process. I don't remember a whole lot of feedback on other criteria to consider for evaluation, or if we think we got it pretty good, or and we're going to watch the replay, so if I did miss some of it, we'll be able to catch it then. And then any changes to the timeline? It sounds like no one's really a fan of the timeline, but understand that we do need to get these things done. We do need to get it in the budget, so next year we can actually be constructing these improvements. That is what I heard from the feedback, just kind of filtering through the details.
Well, you're doing a double duty there, so good for you. That seems like an excellent summary, and I'm seeing several nods. And we've used up quite a bit of time on this. And of course, the next item is extremely important. So I suggest we move on, and that was a really good discussion. I really like finishing on time. So let's do a check-in. I don't know if this can be compressed effectively. But I'm going to turn it over to you, John, and then we'll do a time check at about 7:50. And unless you know now that you absolutely need feedback from us, and then we can take the temperature of the group and see if we have extra time, or we want to wait. Just go ahead and plow ahead. And
Let's plow ahead. I think we can do it.
okay.
And I'll go ahead and get my screen shared. Thanks, everyone. Tonight, talking about the Transportation Improvement Program. This is something we spent a lot of time on last year. This year, we're moving 1 year ahead, which means we're looking at the 2022 to 2028 Transportation Improvement Program. Tonight, I'm going to do just a refresher on what the TIP, or Transportation Improvement Program, is, talk about the funding sources, and then I want to go back to our meetings that we had last year around, I want to say September or October or August. I can't remember exactly. And in the packet, we tried to summarize the feedback that we got from the CAB during those meetings when we reviewed different projects, and give you guys an opportunity to tell us if we got the feedback right, or if there's something that we missed. And because we want to use that feedback when we put together the 2023 through 2028 TIP. And then when we also met last to talk about the TIP, there were just some of the projects that the feedback we got from the board is we just need to evaluate this further, that it's a complicated situation. And I took that to mean we need a planning phase. And we've got a number of those, but we only have so much capacity to do those. So I want to talk about prioritizing the planning phase projects as well as the next steps. And as I mentioned, the direction needed is make sure we got the feedback right so we can utilize it, and then to prioritize the planning phase of the project. Every 2 years, the city of Issaquah does the capital improvement plan. And the Transportation Improvement Program, or TIP, is basically a chapter of the capital improvement plan. And in order to prepare these documents, the city has its comprehensive plan, and we do all kinds of plans like the park strategic plan that goes into it, the mobility master plan for the utility projects. There's rate studies that go into it, and a whole bunch of documents that go into putting together the 6-year work program. When we talked about the TIP, we really tried to categorize the projects into buckets. So we had annual projects like the pavement management program and the ADA improvements that we do, projects that are underway. So that was one of the things in the mobility master plan was we need to continue, or we chose to continue with projects that were underway. We have mandated projects, whether it's for safe, like I guess the ADA improvement project is a good example of that, where we really need to get it done in order to be compliant with, in this case, federal laws. And the new priority projects that came from the mobility master plan prioritization, and long-term projects that we're going to keep on the list, but we're not going to get to in the next 6 years, but they play an important part for what we're trying to do for our transportation system. And I'm going to just skip over this a little bit. We've got the projects underway. We've talked a lot about those ones, whether it's the 2 Newport projects, painting the signal poles in the Highlands, as well as the Northwest Sammamish Road non-motorized project. That's a project that we'll actually bring to the tab later on this year. The annual projects, I mentioned a few of those, like the pavement management program and the strategic small capital project. Mandated responsibilities, which is actually most of the annual projects. And I wanted to share a little bit of news, which is why I struck out the Black Nugget retaining wall. Last year, we were actually chasing a grant opportunity and hired a geotechnical consultant to do a little bit of evaluation. And the evaluation came that we did not need to replace that wall yet, which was great news because that was a very expensive project to try and replace the retaining wall behind Fred Meyer. But that also includes slide repair projects, like we've got a retaining wall we're designing on Newport Way near the King County Trailhead that would help prevent the slides that we had earlier this year. We have a number of funding sources, and a lot of times what really drives what we want to do is being able to match a project up with a funding source. And in a perfect world, we'll get a really high community priority that meets the goals of the mobility master plan that also competes well for a grant. But that's something that when we put together the TIP, we really consider whether it's a project that qualifies for traffic impact fees or the bicycle and pedestrian mitigation fees from a city point of view, or if it's one where we can apply for external funding, or sometimes in a development agreement. Right now, there's 3 projects that are a high priority, or I guess that are in the TIP in this current 6-year time period that are traffic impact fee projects, which are the 2 projects on Newport Way, as well as a future crossing of I-90 located somewhere between 10th Avenue and 12th Avenue. There's other projects that can use traffic impact fees, but those are more of the long-term, not in the next, well, the I-90 crossing won't be built in the next 6 years, but I think we'll do some planning work on it within the next 6 years. The bicycle and pedestrian mitigation fees, those are ones where when we update our traffic impact fees, we create lists of the projects that are eligible for bicycle and pedestrian mitigation fees, as well as traffic impact fees. And right now we just have really 2 projects that are still really on there. And I wanted to give an update to the tab of this year we're doing a technical update to the concurrency model. It's not changing the concurrency system. It's just updating a number of technical land use and traffic things. But once that's done, next year, the city will be able to update the bicycle and pedestrian mitigation fees as well as the traffic impact fees. And I think we have an opportunity when we create this tip to be very deliberate about the bicycle and pedestrian projects that we include in it, because those will be the ones that will go into the new fee study, which will then open up those sources of funding for being able to build these projects. I'm hoping that you guys had a chance to look through the memo, the staff report that we wrote where we summarized the feedback. So I'm not going to go through all of it, but this is just the list of the projects that we received feedback from last fall. And when we get to the discussion part, we can come back to it and if need be pull up this list or maybe even pull up the memo or if you have notes ready to present. The mobility master plan has an evaluation criteria that assigns points to projects, and this is the current system that we have that was put together when the mobility master plan was adopted. Just a little bit of a input or thing to add is that the plan has always been to update this to make sure that our evaluation criteria and the climate action plan do align together. It is on the to-do list. It won't get done in time for this tip update, but it'll get done. We just need the capacity to be able to do it in the time-wise that it was adopted on December 6th, the climate action plan. And when we revisit the mobility master plan later on this year, that is one of the things that will be part of the discussion. And it won't change any of the work that we're doing over the next 2 or 3 years. So we do have time to get to that later on this year. We don't need to rush making sure that the climate action plan is integrated with the mobility master plan priorities. But I did want to mention that is something that is on our to-do list. And then as part of our discussion of the feedback that I would like from the tab, that is the planning phase projects, which are we've got a project at Front and Dogwood, and Rainier's also right there, and the trolley tracks. And there's a lot to consider right there. It's something we need to take a look at. Recently, the city, through a development agreement, completed a new traffic signal at the Three Trails crossing. That's where the Scramble crosswalk is, as well as the Juniper Trail, the Rainier Trail, and the East Lake Sammamish Trail. That's why it's called Three Trails, because they all intersect there. But the development agreement project only built part of the project, but the second part is to work on Juniper and Rainier and how they approach the intersection. And so we need to do some work on figuring out how to finalize that project. The Sunset Way multimodal improvements, at one point the city had proposed doing a cycle track. We got some community feedback and discussed, but never came up with a final concept for Sunset Way. And that is one where we need to do some sort of work to figure out what we want for bicycles and pedestrians whether it's along Sunset Way or a block over, but we need to look at that. And then we talked to the tab about Spock Mountain and doing some sort of non-motorized improvement, whether it's a bike lane with a sidewalk or just a wide paved shoulder, but to try and include some room for pedestrians. And the feedback that we got from the tab was we need to evaluate this further because there's a number of concerns with the topography, and it would be such a big project that we just really needed to look at it. And we didn't feel as staff that this is something that we could just easily take a look at kind of as we fit in, that we need to make some time to actually do it. And then earlier tonight, I spoke about the tier 1 and tier 2 sidewalk gaps and trying to come up with a way to prioritize getting those gaps filled and to look at some of the challenges so that way we can work towards completing those gaps. The direction we need tonight is to go back to the criteria the feedback that we received last September and October, make sure we heard it right so we can apply it to the new tip, as well as to prioritize the planning phase project so we can start incorporating that into our work plan. The next steps following tonight's meeting, and there's a few more. We're going to meet as a tab in March to finalize the tabs portion of the input on the tip. A few other steps in between. City code says that the tip will go in front of the environmental board, and we're getting that scheduled. It'll probably be in early April. There will be a council study session, most likely in early May, with a public hearing after that and council adoption at the meeting following the public hearing, assuming all goes well. And at this point, we can open it up for comments and discussion and questions, as well as going back to the feedback. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
Thank you, John. You did a good job getting through, and sure, I'm glad I did all my homework. There's a lot of material there. So who would like to start us off? Surely there's questions and comments. Oh, Julian, go ahead.
I suppose I'll start. I think you got in the memo our discussions back last year pretty good. But in terms of the weighing of the criteria, I think that has changed, especially with the public comments we've received from individuals and affiliation groups. I think it's something to consider. Maybe not that drastically we can change it, but we should reweigh something in terms of like multimodal improvements and making sure that environmental factors are accounted for much more heavily. And with the concurrency discussion, I think it's at some point, I think we have to talk about lowering the level of service. I don't know. At some point, we're going to have to do that down to F. I don't know, but that's for another day.
I always have a question or comment, but I like to drag my feet to let other people speak first. But Tom, go ahead. I'll come back to me. Thanks.
Yeah, I just interesting comment about lowering the level of service, because that's, I mean, from years of traffic engineering, you just keep, things are just always going to get worse. So I like to look at other alternatives as to lowering the level of service, throughout the city. And I'm sorry, looking at the presentation over here for marathon, and it just slipped my mind, so I'll have to come back when I can remember the other comment I was going to make.
Okay, I'm going to bring us back off the level of service, a meaty topic, a worthy topic, not tonight's topic. And I was just going to say, John, I think you guys did an excellent job capturing everything that I remember. And short of going back and listening to all of our meetings, I think you did a great job. I had one really minor comment, but on the memo, item number 3 was the point about the 3 trails crossing improvements. The first bullet point, I had this comment and I remember seeing some nods because I think we all do this thing where Isabel was surprised to hear that some of us make a right on Gilman and a left at that 3 trails and duck up Rainier. And so if people were not allowed to turn left, then it may impact Front Street traffic. So I just was wondering why that comment. I don't think it needs to be so general. I think there's a concern about when it says the impact to other streets, there was just a concern about unintended consequence of traffic who habitually uses that as an alternative to Front Street. So we might as well call it out, I guess is all I was saying, is because I don't think it's a broad issue. I think it's an issue for that one driver behavior. And I remember seeing a few other people saying that they do the same thing. So, and I don't think it's worth reopening, but I just suggested that that comment be made more specific so it doesn't get lost. So someone doesn't say, I don't know what they're talking about, and then kind of move on. So that was the only comment I had. And then looks like maybe Tom. Oh, and I guess I was just going to say that to the other part of the question about the phase projects, maybe it's just the planner in me, but I think that it makes sense. Every time we had that discussion, it felt like we were not in a position, and so I would be supportive. But I also wanted to make sure that there were other planning efforts prior to that, design efforts, were they just not very robust? Or did something else change? Is it just the city grew, or what do we know now that we didn't know then? I know each project is a little different, but I just don't want to keep planning. I just want to make sure we're not doing that.
Right. So it's kind of a project by project basis. The sidewalk gaps, that's a new one. Like we've kind of identified them, but that's more on a high level, do a few checks on GIS and come up with a map. It needs a lot of refinement for the sidewalk gaps. The Front Street and Dogwood is currently just at a technical level of service. And I won't dive too deep into the concurrency, but I will a little. What they do for concurrency is they look at our existing system, and I'm going to skip that, and then they look at the land use and say between now and a future year, whether it's 2040 or 2050, how much land use is available to be developed. And then they make some assumptions and calculate the number of trips. So we'll have let's say this many trips now, and then in 2040, this many trips. And then they take a traffic software modeling, and it distributes the trips throughout the city system. Once the trips are generated throughout or distributed throughout the system, they then take those trips and look at the signalized intersections and calculate the level of service. I suspect, and I wasn't here then, that what happened is they looked at it, they realized they needed an extra turn lane in order to meet the level of service. We now have a project with a turn lane, but that was a very simple way of looking at it. And we have a unique situation because this isn't a regular intersection. This is where we've got Rainier coming in at an angle. We've got Dogwood coming in perpendicular to Front Street, and we have Front Street being Front Street, plus the trolley tracks right there. So it's a unique situation. We haven't done much planning beyond saying we need an extra turn lane there in order to meet our future level of service. Now, if someone knows the history better than I, they might be able to say something. The Squawk Mountain, that really came when we did the CIP last year, where a number of residents were very outspoken saying, and we also see this in Sequoia Fix, where a number of people would like to see non-motorized improvements up there because they really don't have much. And as staff, we don't know the solution and we don't know what we can and can't do. And that's why we wanted to plan it a little bit more. The Three Trails crossing was always intended to be a bigger project than what was built, with improvements on the southern end, which would have been designed as one whole package and looked at entirely. But because we now have part of it built, it gives us an opportunity to look at it from a fresh perspective of saying, well, this is partially built. What's working well? Where are there problems? We know we want to do some improvements on the southern leg of the intersection or legs. That what should we do so that way we can better define a project? And so it's maybe more of a detailed planning of let's come up with something that we can, a layout that we can actually budget and build in the future. And then Sunset Way, I think that might have been part of the rock and roll plan, but I know there's some history from when the city did a bond measure. I don't know enough to jump down that rabbit hole, but I know that at the end, I think the city never came up with a preferred concept and kind of left it as is. But from a park strategic point of view, as they're looking at their green necklace, getting to that part of town for walkers and bikers is important because there's a lot of trail access that way. And so that's a high priority for the city, but we just don't know what we want to do there. And then it also would tie into as development occurs on the Sunset right now, we don't know what to tell them.
Thank you. That was a very thorough answer. I appreciate it. Tom had a couple of comments and then Julian after
Yeah,
Tom.
just probably a comment on the Three Trails crossing improvement. Since we've been here, that's been a controversy, so probably don't want to change it because it'll give us something to talk about for the next 25 years. So there are two accesses that you can go up the street and turn and go down to the street and the tie-in to where the conference park is and come back. So you could close that left turn exit or the left turn where you take a right and a quick left and make that in a right in, right out connection to that street. And the people who know go up and make the turn and go up a block and then make the turn. Then the other part is if you do close that, there could be analysis done on the all-way or the all-light, all-red walk, where the walk could be coordinated with the flow of traffic as opposed to having an all-walk signal. That would improve traffic flow or people movement at that intersection. And that's the only one I have a comment on.
Julian.
Yeah, I remember with the Sunset Way project that was proposed in 2015, there was like the opposition mostly came from, the parking, and then a lot of people used the side streets, so they argued that the project wasn't needed. But it is a bit of a bummer that didn't go through because that other section of Issaquah Preston Trail going along I-90, kind of like from basically all the way up to the fork to Issaquah Highlands. It's closed now until 2023, so it was a bummer that didn't go through. But I think that project could utilize like a combination of both safety improvements on the street and on the side streets. Some combination of the two. I'm not sure if that's the kind of input you were looking for at this time, though. Just throwing that out there.
John, if I understand correctly, you are just making sure that we all agree that that needs a special, its own specific dedicated planning phase. Each of those projects needs, we all talked about needing, so the answer is all these are good ideas, but really these are the list of projects that need a round of a dedicated planning round, planning and design, right?
Yes, and this can be kind of hard because we're a little bit crunched on time, and I'm not sure the best way in a format like this to get it. Trying to prioritize which one to try and do first, which one to try and do second, and get what's the most important, because we won't have the capacity to do all of them as soon as we would like. And trying to fit them into the schedule so we can make sure that we get to the ones that are the most important and work our way down to the ones that are not as important.
Could we maybe suggest, can that be kicked to the next one? Because I think that we should have a process by which we, like, I mean, it doesn't, I'm only somewhat interested in what each of us individually thinks is most important. I'm more interested in what we think is a good way to decide what is most important. And we've done a lot of work in the MMP with criteria, and there's been some suggested additional criteria with regard to environment, and we always trying to add equity. So I would encourage us to, if John, if you think that we can work this into the timing, I'd like to have a discussion about how we decide, as opposed to just each of us, well, this is my favorite project, or I think this one's important. Each of us is coming at it from a, just a more of a one-off, and I'd rather be more systematic. And I see Erica has a comment, so maybe she can help us advance this.
Yeah, no, I agree with that, or like we need to talk about the process of how we're deciding more. And I am looking back at my notes from last year, from February 4, and I guess at that meeting I had asked if we had uh like a way of sussing out like the user demographics, and at the time the answer was that we didn't, but like it was being worked on. And so a year later I'm wondering where things are with that.
I would say we don't have that, but let me make a note to follow up on that in more detail.
Because if we're talking about process like that, that's important to me, but
Well, I think what I'm hearing, and I'll look for head nods, is that these are
Sorry,
all.
John, let's hear what David has to say.
Sure.
Maybe he's
Yep.
got, but thank you. I'm sorry to interrupt you. Go ahead, David.
Thanks. John, I think you did a great job, and to answer the question on that, did the staff accurately understand the feedback? I think they did. I mean, the way you presented it, I'm very clear that you got that. Got to remember, a year ago, I was brand new on this board, and it was like, oh wow, there's a lot of stuff here. So I think you got it clearly. But I agree with the comments that have been made tonight. I think the prioritizing is going to be a tougher nut to crack, and I think we've got to put our heads together to figure out how we help the staff in being able to prioritize, because I see your dilemma very clearly. We all, as Erica said, or one of you said, we've all got our favorite projects that we'd like to see, but is that the right way to go? And I think we got to look at that together to see what it is. And I know we can't do it tonight, but is that going to require another meeting?
Well, here's what I'm going to propose is we come back because we're coming back 4 weeks later to talk about the TIF and talk about how to prioritize those projects. And as we hear the presentation and memo, base it off of what we have in the mobility master plan and use that as the basis for the conversation. Do a little bit of legwork to say, here's the criteria in the mobility master plan. What other criteria should we look at? This is how it applies. And have a conversation that's led by the mobility master plan. That's what I would propose. And do that in 4 weeks.
I think that makes a lot of sense, and I think that if I understand the process correctly, we can't change the mobility master plan. You can't change the criteria in the mobility master plan because it's not a website. You don't just update it, willy-nilly. But that doesn't mean that our recommendations have to be 100% tied to we can make recommendations that use the mobility master plan. They're informed by it, but may have additional criteria that we all agree to that we've talked about. And I don't think we're that far off, but we've all kind of talked about a few different things that maybe the main is there enough emphasis on it informed by the climate action plan, and is there enough emphasis on equity? Would we do it any differently if we were looking at it through an equity lens? And those are things I can think of. But am I right, John? We absolutely, we can't change the MMP, but if we think the criteria is lacking, we can just add that as we're making recommendations, right?
That's my understanding. Yes.
Yeah. We can't go back and change the thing that's been adopted by council, but well, okay. Well, that sounds pretty reasonable. Seeing lots of head nods and yeah, this is the important work. This is the good stuff. So we want to get it right, and we want to be methodical, and I appreciate everyone's patience, because it's also kind of fun just to dive into specifics. Okay, I think that we're ready to close then on that item, John?
Yes.
And anyone else? Okay. That brings us to the work plan, and I do have a very brief chair report. And I don't know, Joseph, if you have the youth report, but let's start with the work plan.
Okay, I'm going to quickly share my screen and short on time, I'll go brief. The March meeting, there will be an update on the Title 18 project. That's the land use code, but specifically talking about circulation and parking. We will continue the TIP discussion, and thank you for the feedback tonight. And Dale in the city's finance department, she will be here to talk about performance metrics. In April, it's like we're going to talk about the neighborhood safety program. We're going to come back that one, and the Northwest Mammoth Road non-motorized project, the transit study. I'm not sure if we'll talk about it at that meeting or not. That might get pushed out. And finally, we will introduce the ADA transition plan that we're working on this year. And we'll just cover the next 2 months for the work plan. And back to you, Cynthia.
Do we have a staff report?
Yeah, I'll go really quickly. There was a memo that Stephen had attached to the agenda. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to email him directly. And the city made an offer to a transportation program coordinator. He has accepted, and the anticipated start date is March 1st. And we're really excited. His primary responsibility will be the Squawk Palace shuttle that we are piloting. We're designing it this year and piloting it next year, as well as helping out with the neighborhood safety improvement program and the city's commute trip reduction. That's it for the staff report.
Excellent. Okay, I just have two quick things. So as I mentioned before, I'm serving on the mayor's capital finance community task force. And this is an ad hoc committee. We have an assignment and we are getting ready to deliver that assignment. So we will be presenting our recommendations to council in early March. And I can provide an update as to the final recommendations on March 17th when we meet again as part of my chair's report, or and I'll just make sure that there's enough time to do that so that there'll be adequate Q&A. David, you've got a question?
When in March, Cynthia?
You know, as I was writing these notes, I ran out of time to look it up. They're in their regular council meeting, so it's the first one. What would that? It's on my schedule, but it's in their regular council meeting. Sorry, I would have to look at my phone, and then I would get distracted by all the texts that have come in the last 2 hours, so I can't answer that. But it is in the early, yeah, it's in early March.
It's a Monday, yeah.
Okay, Monday, yeah, okay. And I will just let you know that not much has changed since the last time I gave you an update, which is still that transportation is the #1 priority, with facilities and parks and trails being second, and well, basically tied. We didn't actually decide where those two ranked, but we definitely decided that transportation was the priority, and we spent the last several months discussing different funding mechanisms. So I won't get into that, but we will be bringing forth recommendations for how to fund additional investments in infrastructure, with transportation being the priority. But this is just a recommendation. This isn't a plan. They will just vote to accept or receive our recommendation. And we went pretty far with a lot of ideas and a lot of things, you know, that may or may not happen, but there was pretty much unanimous consent to go ahead and recommend investments in new funding tools, with transportation being the priority. But I'll give a little more detail, and there will be a pretty brief, it's only about 10 pages, the final recommendation report. And then I have a request, and we can talk about it more later, but I would like to know, John, if we can at some point have a presentation on the climate action plan. I keep hearing about it. I haven't taken the time to read it. I think it would be great to have a representative come, either a staff or maybe even one of the folks from the board. Was it the environmental board that worked on that? I don't know what's feasible, but I just wanted to say that I suspect that my fellow committee members are very interested in really the highlights of that, and hearing more about that. So I suspect that a lot of our work is really supportive of it. It sounded like from some of the public comment that, you know, it wouldn't be surprising to know that some of our MMP aligns nicely with it, but it'd be nice to really be able to reconcile that and be more familiar with it.
I'll reach out to the sustainability manager about that.
Okay. That is all I had. Joseph, did you have a youth report?
No, I don't have a youth report today.
Okay. Sean, do you have anything else? Okay.
Nope.
We're at 7:59. Does anyone else have anything they just need the rest of us to know about?
I just confirmed with a council member that there are board stipends available for everyone. So I don't know anything about that though, or like if there's a form and it's, you know, not required, obviously, it's just an offer that's available. So I don't know if we'll get some like staff direction on that later or.
I'll look into that.
I'm wondering if I don't want to open a topic we've already closed, but I'm wondering if this board wants some input on the kind of, I know that you said staff would be selecting the participants in the neighborhood program, but I think that maybe would it be appropriate for us to have like a criteria or a profile or something, just some input on what kinds of things that we'd be hoping for, because we have so many times spoken about all these different objectives about inclusion and equity and in our transportation system. And I can think of ideas about how we might achieve that, but I don't know if that's appropriate. But you know what? Joseph and John and Isabel and I will have our pre-meeting with staff, and we can talk about that a little bit. Joseph, put your thinking cap on, and we'll think about that. Yeah. Okay, now it's 8:01. Darn. Okay. Thank you all for a terrific discussion. Looking forward to sharing the chairship with you, Joseph, and I hope you all have a great evening. Thanks a lot, John. You carried a lot of water tonight.
Good night, everyone.
Yeah. Thank you,
Have a great
John.
evening.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.